Mr. Bruce, Christopher Bruce, appreciate you being here again this morning, Mr. Bruce.
Thank you, Chairman Burns. Thank you, members of the committee. It's actually a privilege to go after Charlie Member. He's one of the best advocates that we have down here at the Capitol. So I'm going to jump right into it. Christopher Bruce, Political Director of the ACLU of Georgia. Take this off. Go Dogs. Fundamentally, in our election system, Georgia's voters cast their ballot securely and legally in three ways. As we know, absentee by mail, 2, early in person, and on 3, election day. At its core, HB 531 makes considerable cuts to these in each forms of voting without justification. So let's look at first, when it comes to absentee by mail voting. We continue to share many of the concerns that have been raised, including new requirements to provide sensitive personal information with the application and on the ballots, and who are dealing with voters at risk of identity theft. We're discuss various unfunded mandates, like requiring security paper for ballots, and the fact that even Governor Brian Kemp, who was in quarantine for COVID-19, the Friday before the election, would not have been able to vote in the general election under the absentee timeline under this bill. Second, the cuts in this bill to early voting in person are deeply alarming. Section 18 of the bill would cut weekend voting hours in the 5 most populous counties in Georgia by 40%. Let's look at Gwinnett County, and their voters themselves would lose 2/3 of their weekend voting hours. To put this in further perspective, House Bill 531 would cut early voting access for well over 3 million active voters in the state of Georgia, and that is 41% of all voters statewide. This bill creates an impossible choice for the counties, and that's between 1, no Sunday voting at all, or 2, an extremely confusing situation of no Saturday voting the first weekend and no Sunday voting the second weekend. When nearly 400,000 Georgians of all stripes, political persuasions, ethnic backgrounds, cast their ballots on the weekend during the general election and runoff, these cutoffs cannot be justified. I'm going to say that number again, 400,000 Georgians. The bill also makes large cuts to early voting access for the federal runoffs. It would have a limited early voting in most of our runoff to 3 days. So that would be, how would the 2.1 million Georgia voters who voted in the runoff election 3 weeks be expected to vote in just 3 days? 2.1 million. The cascading effects of such a drastic cut to early voting access would paralyze our election system. But let me focus on especially the barriers that this bill places on election day voting. The proposal to toss out tens of thousands of election day ballots that were cast by eligible voters within their own counties or residents, within their own counties, but outside of their precinct. The justification offered for this proposal is a concern for down ballot races is not only unwarranted given the current capabilities of Georgia's ballot marking devices to print full ballots, but the justification is also fundamentally at the odds of the constitutional right of every Georgian to be able to choose the races in which they want to vote. So in 2020, Georgia general election.
Mr. Bruce, I'd ask that you wrap up your testimony. We appreciate it, and we recognize that these are significant issues, but please help conclude, and we have some questions for you.
Absolutely. And Chairman, this may be my last time in front of the committee. I just want to thank you for the way that you've held the committee down. This is one of the most pivotal bills that have been happening down in the state legislature. This could have gone a lot worse. So I appreciate
It's not that you're pretty, it's just you're not as ugly as I thought you were.
I appreciate your leadership.
Thank you. No, from you, that's a great compliment.
I yield to any questions.
I recognize the leader for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The weekend thing, what if in there it was 2 mandatory weekend days and 2 optional that were left up to the county?
So Thank you, Leader, for your comment. We're trying to get rid of the confusion that goes along with it. So we want to be able to crunch those numbers all together and see how many voters would actually be impacted by it. So,
Well, you wouldn't know across the state. You would know in a county.
correct.
So those counties would have the option to use all 4 weekend days if they so choose. But other counties that have a much less populated area down there would not have the resources or the requirements to have 2 Sundays open. That would, again, be the option that each of those counties use because of the local control that we all seem to, agree is the best way to do this. And I'm just asking, instead of a cookie cutter that's one size fits all for the state, what if we have 2 mandatory, 2 optional?
So I'm glad you brought up that point. I would still have to look at how that would affect in the counties. But I think going to your point more, appropriations. We could have that. We just need to fund the counties to be able to open up on those days.
They don't want it. They don't want to sit there to have 3 people come through on a Sunday, to have a full staff with 3 people coming through a polling precinct. I'm sorry, I will go to the next question I have. You talked about the runoff, 3 days. My understanding of in 531 with the ranked choice ballots that would go to the military overseas, that would allow us to go back to the length of time that occurred before the federal courts mandated that we extend the length of time for runoffs because of the military overseas ballots. That didn't seem to be chaotic. As a matter of fact, there was a lot of gnashing and well in the teeth when the federal decision came in to extend the length of time with a runoff to allow the military overseas ballots to get in. So I'm not sure when the 3 days piece or the where that would be a significant traumatic event on the voters to limit it to a month.
So I think we're talking about, are you just talking about the military ballots, or are you talking about the 2.1 million Georgia voters who voted in 3 weeks altogether?
I'm talking about, you said on a runoff. The reason that we have the extended time period is because of the military overseas ballots. That's the reason we have that. So if you allowed them, and the ranked choice ballots was an option that the state could have used, and we did not. That's one of the things that we're obviously talking about now, would allow us to compress, like the rest of the country does for the most part, to get back within a normal window, a month period in between the end of the race and the runoff, instead of the extended period, which is not for your voting days aren't anymore. They're just pushed further out. So you bring them in closer. All you're doing, the only real losers on that is radio stations, televisions, and newspapers.
They're not getting the ad money.
That's right.
Right.
And bless their hearts, and they got to eat too. But I'm okay with that. So I wasn't sure where you're going with that piece of it.
Really going more towards the way the system's set up right now, and I understand we haven't come up with a opinion on ranked choice voting altogether, so I can't give you an official opinion for the ACLU of Georgia, but it's something that we can look into, and if we'd like to sponsor a bill next year, ACLU will work with you.
Are you going to be back? I thought you weren't going to be back.
Oh, am I fired?
No.
No.
I was going by your comments a little ago. I was disappointed when you said that. Let's do it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Chair recognizes the President Pro Tem for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, it's not a question, but it goes along the lines of the leader's final comments. When Mr. Bruce said he wouldn't be back before this committee, I thought you were implying or telling us that you were moving on to another vocation, job, location, venue, what have you. And I was going to tell you, we appreciate your contributions that you've made over the years to this body and to this process. Fine young man. Appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I greatly appreciate that. I do plan on keeping my job. I do. I'm not sure.
I'll put in a good word for you, Mr.
Mr. Chairman, if I may follow up.
Certainly. Sorry.
There's a couple things I need to tell you about. No kidding.
No. All right. Chair recognizes Mr. The Whip. Senator
there could be a Honda dealership for sale in Gainesville. You could buy it. But my serious question is, earlier you talked about I think you referenced Governor Kemp could not have voted absentee under this bill provision. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, yes.
How?
Yes, thank you for the question, Senator. Under the facts that I think we all know of, Governor Kemp was in quarantine because he was exposed to COVID-19. And at that time, he had to request an absentee ballot to vote by mail. So this would limit that to the point where he would be outside that window to request an absentee ballot and receive it and be able to vote.
Because of the 11 days?
Yes.
So his quarantine came just before the election. I don't recall when that happened. But
I believe that's the facts that were reported within the paper. I don't know, Mark, Mark's shaking his head from the AJC.
So
we just want to make sure that the governor is able to vote.
So what day? How many days prior to an election should the absentee ballot application be sent in? What's the magic number?
That's a great question, Senator. I would love to workshop that with the Board of Elections. But in the ACLU's viewpoint, we can have same-day registration and same-day voting. When it comes to the mail, I would love for things to be overnighted as well. We just want to make sure every
So
Georgia
you
can
would
vote.
advocate for a FedEx package that costs about $30 to be charged to a voter?
It's possible. Now,
Okay.
we're not going to get into budgetary items right now. We're not, but it's a dream that I think we all can get to one day.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any other questions?
I just want to comment what Senator Gooch just said. Whatever it costs to vote, I think it'll be worth it. If it's $30, you said, well, I don't know
Are
if
you-
my mic's
is the
on or
mic
not. She said, whatever it costs to vote, then I think it'll be worth it.
You would
It
support-
has cost more. It has cost lives for people to vote.
So you would support that for the voter to have to pay to vote, in order to vote?
If that's what it takes.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you, Mr. Bruce.
Thank you, Chairman Burns.
I've got to go with Mr. Bruce to draft that legislation.
I appreciate
outta
you
here.
doing that, Mr. Leader.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Our next witness is Pachaya Poi Winachuk. Help me. I apologize yet again.